perhaps you and I are actually just brains floating in a little tiny bit of the universe where there's good stuff happening that makes it look to us as though we're actually sitting in a studio with lights, and maybe none of that's real either.
Yeah, it could be a simulation, it could be the Matrix.
That's right, it could be any of those things. And I mean, those things are always very difficult to rule out. I mean, for all practical purposes, we have to act as if, that's not the case. I'm going to call my Uber when I leave here on the assumption that, I am in fact an ambulating person in the world.
Well, but you are. Like, even if you weren't, you still are. That's the point that was made by... You remember the conversation with Julian? Julian is an engineer, but he has a background in mathematics. He's working on a project where they do geological simulations of what happens under the crust. And I asked him, would it be possible to simulate life from a technological standpoint? How far could we be from having all of that we know happen in a simulation? And his point was like, it is happening. So I guess if it's happening, something is actually rendering it in a way. Like, it doesn't matter if it's like a computer or something beyond our understanding. There is something that is making all of this happen, which makes it exactly the same as if it was a simulation. Whatever is making our universe run, it could be the same as a computer simulating it.
Sure, we might be in a simulation. And that would be an interesting and cool thing to discover, but that wouldn't really undermine anything about how things go. So what's the difference between your universe being made up of whatever it is that simulations are made up of, being run on a computer versus being made up of like weird little quarks, weird little spins up and it's all much of a muchness. Well, that would just be to discover that fundamentally reality is a little bit different than we thought. It wouldn't be to discover that we aren't ordinary human beings ambulating in the world needing Ubers. So it wouldn't actually undermine anything. I think that's right in the case of simulation. I'm not so sure it's right if it turns out that this entire apparent universe is actually just a figment in your brain, and you just suddenly blip into existence, and that's all there is. There's nothing else except that. I'm not so sure the right thing to say then is that actually everything is just as we thought. It's just that it's all in your brain. Like, the universe is just in your brain. I think that's a weirder kind of case.
What are other people? How?
They're nothing. They're just in your head, figments of your imagination.
Good to know.
That's right. That's right. This is a lot of power you have here.
Our bodies are basically sensors that allow us to perceive reality. With different senses, we would perceive reality in a different way. Like bats, reality for them is completely different, and we cannot even imagine how is it to be a bat, because they have ultrasound and whatever. So reality could actually be entirely subjective to individual perceptions, and this could be the byproduct of everyone perceiving their own thing, the best common outcome of all the perceptions summed together. Is that something that would make any sense?
I guess it depends how meaty you want that view to be. So it seems like there's something right about that. There is some way the world is kind of in itself, but then all of these creatures come along and they experience it in very different ways, and they represent it in different ways, and it seems very different to them. So, it seems different to you as to me, and it also seems very different to the bat and the echidna and the platypus. But you might think that there has to be something that seems some way. So that's the world. The world is presented to these various creatures, and there is some way that is, and then there's the way we all experience it, which is all these different kind of subjective ways. And I guess on that view, you might say, look, there's no way of getting past your own subjective way of seeing the world, because it's not like you can ever kind of get out of your head and be able to engage with the world using some other kind of sense apparatus, or even if you could, it would just be like looking at the world as though you're a bat or as though you're a platypus or something. So I think there's something probably right about that view. I had the sense that maybe you were suggesting an even more radical view, which is that there's sort of no way the world is out there in itself. Rather, the world is just the aggregation of all of these kind of subjective experiences. So it's sort of like each of us has a little subjective experience in our head, which is sort of like a little jigsaw puzzle part. Mm-hmm. And what the world is kind of all of the jigsaw puzzle pieces put together in various ways. The question I would have for the person who wants to run with that view is, how is it that we're all having these subjective experiences of the world if there's not sort of something out there independent of us that is the thing that we're experiencing? Yeah, that seems a very radical view. So it kind of goes back to Berkeley when he was this kind of idealist, and he thought roughly something like that, except that he thought that was a bit nutty. So he thought that you need something like God to be kind of perceiving the table to kind of make sure that it's there all the time.